Have you ever had one of those mornings where everything's rushed, but it still feels kind of perfect? You wake up before your alarm goes off, you check on your children while the world is still quiet. You grab your bag, your keys, your coffee, and then you head out the door before the sun even comes up. That was Morgan's routine as a single mom. Every day. Early mornings, long shifts, and just enough time in between to squeeze in bedtime stories and Black Friday sales and beach trips that she saved up for all year. She was building a life, not just for herself, but for her young daughter. And she was doing it. But someone saw that life that she was building and someone felt entitled to it. A monster. And the moment Morgan tried to protect her peace, to draw a line, that monster made sure she would never walk out her front door again. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you have never been here before, I am Kimberlea, and it's nice to finally meet you. And if you are not new here, you'll know from getting to know me in previous videos that I like convenience. If I don't have to leave my house, that is a good thing. That is what I would prefer, and that's where Nurx comes in. Nurx is our sponsor for today's video, and Nurx is a convenient way to get expert healthcare that you deserve, completely tailored to you, all from home. We all know that life is full of changes and transitions, and your healthcare should evolve with you. Nurx makes it easy to take control of your health with personalized, specialty-level care, all accessible right from the comfort of your home. And for me, once Mazzy was born, I was ready to go back on birth control until we decide what's next for us. And Nurx can help you with that, but also support you with your mental health. Nurx can get you the help you deserve with faster intake and ongoing support, while also being accessible and affordable. Nurx is so convenient. While office appointments can take over a month to book, Nurx lets you connect with a licensed medical provider in just a few days to get the support you need. And you can securely message your medical team anytime through the Nurx app for questions or ongoing support. And they'll proactively check in to monitor your progress. I know in this day and age, mental health concerns can still be hard to address and to treat properly. Well, Nurx is here for you with personalized treatments to help manage conditions like anxiety, postpartum depression, I've been there, insomnia, and many more. Over 2/3 of patients report significant symptom reduction after getting help with Nurx. Best of all, Nurx treatments are discreetly shipped straight to your doorstep, and they do accept insurance for many treatments, making your care even more affordable. But even without insurance, Nurx remains accessible, affordable, and easy. So join the over 2 million people who have already taken control of their health journey with Nurx. And again, thank you to Nurx for sponsoring this video. Taking control of your health starts here. Go to nurx.com/Kimberlea to get started, or click the link in my description box, and that's nurx.com/Kimberlea. Now let's get into the video for today. So of course, the story is about Morgan Ashley Fox. She was born on August 22nd of 1991 in Marion, Ohio, to her mom Cindy and her dad Robert. And while her life didn't stay simple for long, one thing remained constant, and that was love. After her parents separated, Morgan's mom eventually remarried a man named Leo Pappas, and that change brought a new kind of fullness into Morgan's life. Suddenly, she was part of something big, something huge, a big blended family, one that didn't believe in using the word stepsister or stepbrother. They were a family, period. Practically overnight, she moved to London, Ohio, and she gained 7 new siblings. Yeah, her mom Cindy already had 5 kids of her own, so now there were 12 of them. 12. I can't even imagine that. But it was the kind of environment that could easily become chaotic, but not for Morgan. It became her safe place, her world. And among her new brothers and sisters, she formed a deep bond with Cora, who was the same age as Morgan and in 2nd grade at the time. Cora was the kind of best friend that didn't even require an explanation. They were from the beginning inseparable. Their bond was instant and it was permanent. And later, Morgan was just as close with her stepsister, Megan. And if you asked Megan what Morgan meant to her, she would tell you that Morgan was the one who always showed up. She was the one who protected her, who fought for her, who looked out for her with that fierce, loyal, sisterly love that only a sister could. Megan knew without a doubt that if anyone ever tried to bother her, Morgan would be there in her corner, ready to throw down, as Megan put it. And she meant that literally. Morgan was the kind of person who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to go after it either. She had goals, ambitions, dreams that didn't come with a backup plan because she knew she would achieve them, even though life has a way of throwing us curveballs. I'm sure all of us can relate to that because not long after high school, everything changed for Morgan. In August of 2012, Morgan's priorities shifted when she became a mom just before her 21st birthday. She posted picture after picture on social media of her precious baby girl. Her daughter Amelia instantly became her purpose, her reason for waking up in the morning and pushing through the hard days. And there were a lot of those. After the relationship with Amelia's father ended, she, at the least, had the support of her mom and her stepfather. She was living at home, but it wasn't easy. She knew that she wanted more for her life, but she was doing her best to make ends meet. She was working as a server. She would work for different restaurants, including BJ's Restaurant and Brewery, and still found time to go out with friends and post pictures of things like her new hair. She decided in 2013 that she wanted to try a new look. She dyed her platinum blonde hair brown, but it was only a few weeks later that she said she doesn't feel like herself without her blonde hair. But she still really did like the look. She even posted a few selfies in her car that she put on Facebook with many of her friends saying they really did like her hair dark. But it didn't take long for that to wash out and for her to go right back to her signature blonde, straight, full, shiny hair that she was known for. She wore that dark eyeliner all the way around her bright blue eyes, and she liked to go tanning to stay fit. And I can safely say she was really into 2000s fashion, but that's when she was growing up, so it's to be expected. Everything from studded jackets to layered tank tops and everything in between that's kind of coming back into style now. And before you judge her for her duck lips and her little ducky face, I think we can say it was still popular in 2013. Maybe it was on its way out. Even her friends gave her a little crap about it, saying, "I love you, Morgan, but please stop doing the duck face." Morgan said it was more of a kissy face, but I think most of us are guilty of it. I know I am. Going through Morgan's Facebook and Instagram posts, you could see her sense of humor, the songs she liked, her perseverance, and she constantly kept her friends updated about what was going on in her life, whether she had a job interview or she was dealing with somebody or something difficult. At the time, she was working at Restoration Hardware, about 20 minutes away in West Jefferson, trying hard to be able to give Amelia everything she needed, and she would brag about her little girl all the time. At just 14 months old, she could point things out in a book when Morgan told her what to find. She was so smart and observant, and she knew the proper use of things like a brush for her teeth or a brush for her hair, and she knew that shoes went on her feet. Morgan posted about how proud she was as her mom. Her stepdad, Leo, was great with Amelia as well. He stepped up and became that father figure, that person to laugh with her, to play with her. It was really heartwarming to see a lot of the pictures of them together. Family meant everything to Morgan. Every year, she would save all of her tip money, just a little at a time. So when the holidays rolled around, she could walk into the Children's Play store and spoil Amelia. Not with one or two things, but everything. She couldn't decide on one outfit, so she'd have to buy them all. She didn't just want her daughter to feel loved. She wanted her to experience it, to live it. And that's how Morgan showed up. It wasn't just about the holidays. Morgan and Amelia were inseparable all the time. They would spend hours playing dress up, doing each other's hair, experimenting with makeup, taking selfies. Morgan had this bright, stylish energy about her. She was always put together, always glowing, and Amelia mirrored that right back. She was like a mini me of her. They were best friends. They made each other laugh constantly. They shared the same love for the beach, especially Myrtle Beach. That was Morgan's favorite place growing up. And now she was passing on that joy to her daughter. They truly had the type of mother-daughter relationship that many of us dream about. Everything Morgan did was with Amelia in mind. Her jobs, her sleep schedule, her budget, her future plans. Every sacrifice was for her daughter, and it showed. It was tough. She even posted about it, saying it was her first day of work at Restoration Hardware on October 10th of 2013. She said, "I had a good first day of work, but I hate being away from Amelia. This is definitely going to be a really tough transition for me." Morgan even used the broken heart emoji. And I feel that as a former single mother myself. And I'm sure a lot of you have a similar experience, even if maybe you are not a single mom, but you're going back to work after maternity leave and you know that feeling. Your baby is left behind. They're probably wanting you. They're crying. They're looking around for mommy. And it's the first time that your routine doesn't involve your baby being right by your side. It's a lot. Many of her friends and family members gave her advice on that post. She was working Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 3:45 p.m., and some Saturdays. She said it took her a good 30 minutes to get home, so she just hated it. It made her sad. At this point, she also realized she would probably have to put her daughter in daycare, which was another thought that she hated thinking about. She posted about the fact she wasn't comfortable with somebody else watching her child, but she would wake up and she would do it all again the next day and said, I'm up bright and early making Amelia money. And that's what it was all about. It was nice that she did have her dad and her stepmom and her mom and her stepdad close by. They would take her out for dinners and, of course, spoil both of them. Morgan posted about how much it meant to her and how lucky she was. She said she was so thankful about how she was raised and where she was in life because of it. She told her friends not to get caught up with life and the daily stresses, but to remember how truly blessed we all are and just take a minute from your hectic schedule. She would say, even though it seems chaotic, just take a deep breath, breathe in everything that's good, and breathe out everything that's bad, because life may be short, but it's yours. I really hope I'm giving you a picture of who Morgan was. She was a beautiful, positive, upbeat person who looked at the good things in life. She valued family getting together for the holidays and dinners and making sure to take time for herself, and especially time for her daughter. Whether that was carving pumpkins together, going trick-or-treating, dressing up, and having fun. And then by 2017, when Amelia was in kindergarten, she was also in junior competitive cheerleading, and Morgan could not have been more proud. She went to all of her practices and competitions and cheered her on. Morgan posted pictures of Amelia smiling while holding up a trophy. And at this point, Morgan had shifted to posting more on Instagram and less on Facebook. And when she did post on Facebook, it was no longer her talking about herself or what she was going through or even making posts at all. She was just sharing things, sharing articles, sharing videos, but not really sharing about herself as much as she used to. Instead, by the next year in 2018, her Facebook had become a place where she would just sell things, like all of Amelia's old clothes that she could no longer fit into anymore. It was a way that she could make some extra cash and also clear out space for new things, because her mother's house wasn't that big. And speaking of her mother's house, by August 1st of 2018, Morgan's life changed again. For years, she juggled multiple jobs before finally landing a position at FedEx Ground in North Canton. This was big for her. It was an established corporation, one with benefits and a chance to move up into higher paying positions, but she had to start at the bottom. The hours were brutal. Her shift started at 2 a.m., but that meant she had more time with Amelia in the afternoons. And for Morgan, that made it worth it. Every sleepless night, every early morning alarm, every exhausting shift. It was all worth it when she saw the potential she had at FedEx. She decided to leave her serving jobs behind and throw herself fully into her new role. And her dedication paid off. I mean, Morgan was never lazy. This woman did it all. She never complained and she was never complacent. And eventually, in just under a year, on July 1st of 2019, she was promoted to team manager. She was proud of her progress. She saw a future at FedEx, a ladder she could climb, stability that she could count on. For once, it finally felt like things were falling into place. She had a job with real potential, a daughter who knew nothing but love, and soon she knew she'd be able to make it on her own, get her own place, build a life on her terms, including a life with a new man, which was another exciting part of Morgan's life at the time. After years of just scraping by, juggling jobs, and pouring everything into being the kind of mother her daughter could rely on always, things finally started to shift for Morgan herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Her job at FedEx had turned into something steady, and she no longer was just clocking in to make it to the next paycheck. She moved up. Being a team manager finally meant she was getting those benefits, and she saw a clear path forward. But she wasn't done yet. She had traded in her late night shifts for her early morning FedEx runs, and they were brutal, but they gave her one thing she valued the most, and that was more time for family. The rest of the world might have still been asleep while she was hauling boxes and overseeing logistics at FedEx. But when the afternoon and evenings came around and her daughter was out of school, Morgan was there. And for the very first time in a long time, she wasn't doing all of it alone anymore. It was during her time working at FedEx that she met a coworker who became her boyfriend, and that was Jason Scarnecchia. He was kind, attentive, and like Morgan, he was a parent. Jason was 5 years older than her, and he too had a young daughter. And it created this easy understanding between them. They got each other. They knew what it meant to juggle work and parenting, to stretch a budget, and to be exhausted, but still show up. Their relationship unfolded quietly and naturally. There was no big love story or whirlwind romance, just something that felt right and simple, supportive and safe. And when their connection started to grow even more serious, Jason had to make a decision to leave FedEx altogether. The company, like many corporations, did not allow romantic relationships between employees. And rather than jeopardize Morgan's progress, he decided to step away. It was a gesture that made Morgan feel seen and protected, like someone was finally putting her first. By 2019, they had moved in together, renting a 2-story brick home at 6030 Fraser Avenue in North Canton with their 2 young daughters. Amelia was about 7 years old at the time, and it was the very first time that Morgan had ever lived outside of her family's home. This was a big deal. And the house they chose was perfect. It was 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, with a big backyard and a wraparound driveway in a nice little neighborhood. It had plenty of room for a growing family. The home was filled with morning routines, school drop-offs, bedtime snuggles, and the tiny moments that make life feel full. Morgan had built something solid, something safe. At least it felt that way. But I am sure all of you remember 2020. There was nothing stable about 2020. Quite the opposite. The world was pretty chaotic. By October of 2020, we were 7 months into the pandemic, and everything was tense. The news was nonstop cycles of chaos. COVID cases were climbing again. Grocery store shelves were just half empty, and America was just weeks away from one of the most divisive elections in modern history. Schools were flipping between remote and hybrid learning, and everyone was wearing a mask in public. Social media felt like one big long scream for help. I'm sure you can relate because we all went through it. It's actually when I started doing true crime and when we were just waiting for what was going to happen next, spending more and more time on social media, especially TikTok and YouTube, and not really knowing what the future really held. And that must have felt really devastating for someone like Morgan, who already worked so hard to turn her life around, only to now possibly feel like things were all over the place. But the good news for her is that she was working for a shipping company. And let's not forget, while people were sitting at home all the time, they were getting things delivered nonstop. So there was no stopping FedEx. There was no stopping Morgan. She was busier than ever. The demand for more things like groceries being delivered or a bunch of Amazon trips or ordering things online became an even bigger part of all of our lives. So let's go to Wednesday, October 28th of 2020. It was just before Halloween. And in Morgan's house, everything probably felt normal. It was a busy morning, the kind where you're running on autopilot. The air outside was cold and damp, the sky was still dark, and a light rain had been falling for hours. Morgan's day was starting the same way it always did. Her shift at FedEx began at 2:30 a.m., which meant waking up at 1:30, slipping out of bed in the middle of the night while the rest of the world was still sleeping. Her routine was muscle memory by now. Get up, throw on your work clothes, grab your bag, maybe text her mom to check in like she always did, and then head out into the stillness. Outside, the rain was steady, not a storm, not a drizzle, but just that cold, quiet kind of rain that just soaks everything. The kind that makes time feel slower, heavier, and darker than usual. Something nudged him to glance out the window. Maybe it was just a feeling. Maybe it was the gentle rain against the window. But when he looked out there, he was surprised to see Morgan's Ford Explorer still in the driveway. That didn't make sense. Morgan was supposed to be at work and she was never late. Not for work, not for anything. She was the kind of person who'd set alarms just to make sure she never dropped the ball on work, especially now that she was in a management position. Jason knew her schedule. He knew she should have been long gone by then. So he went outside. And as he walked towards the car, the world around him must have felt off because it was too unusual. Even though Morgan's car was parked as it normally would be, and there was no damage or signs of anything weird from the outside, as he got closer, everything changed. Here's the 911 call that Jason made that morning.
911, do you need police Fireward Medical Help.
Police Medical.
Where at?
Fraser Avenue, Frazer.
You need police and medical, you said?
Medical. I mean, pretty sure my girlfriend's fucking dead.
What makes you say that, sir?
I came out here and she's laying in her front seat covered in blood. Looks like her head is bleeding from behind. I don't know if she got bashed.
What is her name, sir?
Her name is Morgan Fox.
You want to try CPR? Or do you think you don't feel a pulse at all, sir?
I don't feel a pulse at all.
He really said, I'm pretty sure my girlfriend is fucking dead. The dispatcher was like, why do you say that, sir? And Jason replied that there was a wound on the back of Morgan's head and she had no pulse. He wasn't even willing to do CPR because he thought that she was too far gone. Her driver's side door was open and inside Morgan was still in the driver's seat, except she wasn't moving. Instead, she was slumped over the center console. Half of her body was on the outside of her car and she was covered in blood. Jason's voice on that call, though, it was flat. It was quiet, almost distant. I found it a little off-putting myself that he wouldn't even attempt CPR, but I also understand the shock that someone could be in. Seeing the condition of Morgan in that moment, hope was lost. And minutes later, deputies from the Stark County Sheriff's Office arrived. Detective Rocco Ross and Sergeant Craig Kennedy would be assigned to this case. But before any formal investigation could even begin, they had to process the quiet horror of all of this. A young mother lifeless in her car, just feet away from her sleeping boyfriend, and where her child goes to bed. The home decorated for Halloween, the rest of the neighborhood as well, which added an eerie layer to all of it. The house sat on this quiet residential street, and the trees overhead and in front added some privacy to the front of the home. The rain had let up a bit, it wasn't pouring, but everything was soaked. Morgan's car was still parked in that driveway. The engine was off now, but the placement of her body suggested that she hadn't been there very long. As they got closer, they saw Morgan. Her purse was still strapped across her shoulder, lying neatly in front of her in her lap, as though she had just gotten inside. Like she had every intention of starting her car and heading off to work like she had done so many times before. Scattered on the ground below the car were items Morgan packed for lunch, a box of Cheez-Its, a water bottle, and another bag, as well as a cracked cell phone. There was even cash still sitting in her center console. Nothing looked like it had been rifled through, so they didn't think this was a robbery. There was no sign of panic, no indication that she had been caught off guard, just that image of her body slumped over, blood pooling against the rain-slicked interior, and inside the vehicle they noticed the passenger side window had been shattered. A bullet hole could be seen in the passenger's door. So now they knew their murder weapon was a gun. This wasn't a chaotic scene. It wasn't messy. It was precise. It felt deeply and horribly personal. A targeted execution, like someone had casually walked up to her and killed her. This driveway hours before had been the starting point of another ordinary workday, but now it was a crime scene. Next, the Stark County coroner Anthony Burton arrived, and he officially pronounced Morgan dead at 8:29 a.m. He could see 2 wounds to her head, one behind her left ear and one towards the top of her head. Later, an autopsy was conducted by Dr. Dolanak. He recovered 3 severely deformed .22 caliber bullet fragments from inside Morgan's head. One was recovered from the left side of Morgan's brain, and the other 2 had exited her head and caught in her hair. The doctor concluded that Morgan's cause of death was gunshot wounds to the head, and the manner of death was homicide. Any of these bullet wounds would have been fatal. They were at close proximity. And I was reading an online article from CantonRep.com, and there was some photos taken by a photographer named Lori Steineck, who was on the scene at the time that everything was unfolding. And wow, the one that shows the crime scene tape wrapped around a pole that says neighborhood watch area right in the front of the house, that really hit me. At this point, they draped a white cloth over the driver's seat to shield the scene from people passing by. There was just this eerie juxtaposition between the decorations outside, knowing that kids live there, and that sign of being a neighborhood watch area, but then someone being murdered feet away. Detectives and deputies were standing outside the vehicle, and they were trying to piece together what happened. They worried about the rain because it could wash away evidence. But as they kept looking at the scene, something stood out. A short distance from the driveway along the street's edge on the neighbor's property, there was a pull-off area near a tall white vinyl fence. In the muddy patch of grass, detectives spotted fresh tire tracks pressed deep into the earth, and along that base of the fence were spatter marks, not from rain, but from mud that was kicked up by wheels spinning quickly. They thought someone had pulled in and then peeled out fast, almost like they were panicked to get away. So this looked like these tire tracks were caused possibly by the killer's vehicle. Detective Ross was still processing all of this when he heard a voice calling out from behind the crime scene tape. He didn't know it yet, but this was Morgan's mom, Cindy. She had just arrived. She was unaware of what had happened. She did not even know that her daughter was dead. She was merely coming over to find out why Morgan hadn't shown up to work that day. A neighbor of Morgan's had called Cindy that morning and told her there was crime scene tape up at Morgan's house. Now, that was very concerning. Cindy then called FedEx, and they told her that Morgan didn't show up. So Cindy got in her car. She drove over to her daughter's house, hoping that it was just a mix-up. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she overslept. But then she saw it, what the neighbor described. The yellow tape, the squad cars, the officers milling around, and she asked the question that every mother prays they'll never have to ask, is that my daughter's car? Where is she? No one answered her at first. Instead, she just stood there, desperately waiting, and that is when she overheard something that I think is unthinkable. When you put all of this together, this mother standing out there with no idea her daughter's dead in that car. This is how she found out. A few feet away, there was a reporter, and loudly they blurted out, probably just speaking to their crew, she was shot in the head. And in that moment, Cindy's world fell apart. How callous. I can't think of anything else but what the F. Maybe the reporter didn't know, or maybe they were just talking to somebody else, of course, but saying that her daughter was shot in the head like that. They didn't have the wherewithal to keep things under wraps, not knowing who was coming and going, that possibly her family members would be unseen. I mean, the reporter's there, so what makes them think that loved ones wouldn't be? I don't know about you, but that just made me really mad. I understand, they have a job to do, so to speak, but I also think they have a responsibility to keep a lot of things in mind, especially the fact that there are people who don't know what's going on, and those people could be loved ones. There is a really, really moving photo that I think is also from the same photographer. It was on that CantonRep.com website as well. And I believe this is probably, I could be wrong, but at least it's one of her loved ones. But it looks like it could be Morgan's mom, who's grasping onto a deputy in that moment, just holding him tight and crying. I can't even begin to imagine the shock and horror and just absolute heartache that poor mother felt in that moment. But of course, she also had to be questioned. And when she calmed down, Detective Ross asked her when she last spoke to Morgan. Cindy said it was at 1:30 a.m. She always called her daughter before her shift to make sure that she was awake, and that morning was no different. Morgan let her know, I'm up, I'm getting ready, and that was it. That was the last time they talked. Later, Cindy called FedEx looking for Morgan because of what the neighbor had said. She wasn't answering any of her mom's calls, so that's when she drove over to Morgan and Jason's place to see what was going on. Not far away, Morgan's closest stepsister, Cora, was trying to get her kids ready for the day when her younger sister, Megan, came running into the room and yelled, Cora, Megan is dead. Cora recalled Megan looking as white as a ghost, and she screamed at her and she was like, what do you mean Morgan is dead? How? Why? It was a total shock. She was still trying to wrap her mind around what she had just heard when Cora called her sister Tessa. And Tessa, through tears, confirmed it. Morgan was dead. She had been shot. She was shot in her own driveway just hours earlier. Nothing about that made sense. No one could comprehend it. How do you go from packing up your work bag, planning Halloween costumes for your child, to be gone before the sun even came up? Cora said that the worst part was knowing not only was Morgan dead, but that she had been murdered. That meant someone, a monster, was still roaming the streets. It puts even more fear into this entire situation. Were they going to strike again? Would they hurt her family, her daughter? Were they safe? Detectives wasted no time canvassing this entire neighborhood. A woman had just been shot execution style in her own driveway, and somehow no one saw anything? Fraser Avenue wasn't a secluded dirt road in the middle of nowhere. This was a busy street in North Canton. Even though it was residential, there were streetlights, sidewalks, neighbors close enough to see if someone forgot to take in their trash bins. This wasn't supposed to happen in their neighborhood. And as the investigators fanned out, they went in every direction, going door to door, hoping that someone caught something. Maybe a strange car, a figure walking down the street, a noise in the darkness, a camera turning on. But no one heard anything. They didn't even hear a gunshot. They didn't hear a scream. I mean, we don't know if Morgan screamed at all or even saw her killer coming. But when I was looking on Google Maps, I did notice the structure of the streets where this house was located was a little bit different. Right next door to 6030 Fraser, where Morgan's vehicle was parked, was a backyard of their neighbor's house, the one with that white vinyl fence where they found the tire marks right in front of it. So the chances are individuals were probably sleeping at the time or getting ready early in the morning and doing something in the front of their home. There was a big backyard separating where Morgan was to where her neighbors would have been. And there was no house in front of Morgan's house, just a yard, and then a house to the left. And it was also their backyard. And then the neighbor on the other side of Morgan's house, well, they were separated by a bunch of really tall trees, a driveway, a shed, a garage, and then their home. So it wouldn't be a big surprise that no one in that area heard anything. Plus, they don't know if they had maybe a silencer on this weapon, but what the investigators did notice is a lot of people had Ring doorbells. But the thing is, as I just explained, the vicinity of where Morgan's house was situated wasn't near someone's front porch. So unfortunately, they checked all those cameras and all the home security systems they could find, and there was nothing. Some of the cameras didn't activate. They were motion censored, so they didn't catch any movement because they weren't in that direction. They weren't even aimed near her home, and that's frustrating. Detectives hoped that some of the systems might have actually been backed up to the cloud, and if there was nothing on the devices themselves, maybe there was some kind of hidden cache stored on a server somewhere that have caught something. So they got a search warrant for Ring, hoping that the company could provide any motion-activated clips from the time of Morgan's murder. But when Ring got back to them, there was nothing. No movement, no uploads, no triggers, just a blank space in that timeline where Morgan's life had ended. That meant they couldn't even get the make and model of the vehicle that left the scene, if that was the killer's car that made those tire marks. The driveway was visible from the street, but not enough. Any camera even pointed in that direction would have probably missed the most crucial moments. No cars were seen arriving, no shadowy figure was caught on their lawn, no one creeping up the side of the house. It was like this killer had appeared in thin air and then vanished into it. And the neighbors themselves couldn't help either. They were asleep. No one recalled anything unusual. There were a few homes that had floodlights, but they said none of them had been triggered or they didn't notice. But to the chief criminal prosecutor, Dennis Barr of Stark County, one thing was really clear. This wasn't a robbery, he told the public. This wasn't random. There was cash in Morgan's car. Her purse was still on her body. Her phone was still there, even though it was tossed to the ground. Nothing seemed to be taken. Nothing seemed to be stolen. This was someone who came there with one purpose. He said, to kill Morgan. But had they come there? Or were they already there? From the very beginning, detectives knew they needed to take a closer look at Jason, Morgan's boyfriend, the person who not only discovered her body, but also made the 911 call. It wasn't just because he was the last person to see her alive. Statistically, when someone's murdered, you all know this because you're watching a lot of true crime, you have to start from the inside, the person closest to the victim, and then work your way out. Whether that's the boyfriend, the spouse, the ex, it doesn't mean they're guilty, but you have to start there. So when investigators arrived at the home on Fraser Avenue, they asked Jason if he would be willing to talk to them. Nothing formal at this point, just a few questions at the scene, and he agreed. He told them that he and Morgan had been living together for about a year. Her workday started at 2:30 a.m., which meant that she usually woke up between 1 and 1:30. And according to Jason, that morning was normal. He said he stayed in bed, she got up, she got dressed, and she left. Or that's what he thought. Jason said he didn't get out of bed until probably 6 in the morning, and that's when he looked outside and saw Morgan's car still in the driveway. Immediately, he said something felt wrong. But what stuck with the investigators wasn't just what Jason said he saw, it was the way he was saying it. It was his tone. When they asked, can you come down to the station for a formal interview? He said yes, but then he kind of paused. He looked down at his feet. He was barefoot. And he was like, well, I need to grab a pair of socks before he put on his shoes. And this was something small, something that most people wouldn't even notice. But Detective Rocco Ross, it was a red flag for him. The reason why? He didn't want to let this guy out of his sight. So Ross said, you know what? Where are your socks? I'll bring you a pair. He didn't want there to be any opportunity for anything to be disturbed in the house before this scene could be processed. And instead of saying, okay, Jason stopped. He hesitated. He just stood there barefoot, and then suddenly he seemed very unsure if he needed socks. And then he put his shoes on without them, and they left. I mean, it wasn't much, But it was enough of an odd situation to make Detective Ross stop and think about it. What was Jason so worried that they would find in that house? What was he trying to hide? A weapon? Well, they were going to ask him, can we do a little search around? But because of this odd behavior, they were like, nope. We're going to get a full search warrant so that we don't have to ask him and tiptoe around. We're going to go from floor to ceiling in every nook and cranny. And then there was more hesitation when they asked him if they could look through his phone. That's strange. I know how attached we are to our phones. I get it 100%. I understand. But his girlfriend had just been killed. You should willingly hand over your phone, say go through anything and everything to get what you need so that you can help find out who did this to your loved one. Instead, Jason told the officers he wasn't comfortable turning over his phone because it wasn't his. That was weird. Well, one of them was his phone and he turned that over, but it was his work phone that he was holding back. Finally, when they said, listen, we're only going to need it for a few minutes. We're going to give it right back to you. It was then he was comfortable handing it over. So at that point, they did go over to the police station and they did a full interview and an extraction of both his work phone and his personal one. And from the moment he sat down, his demeanor was odd. He was calm and he was detached. It wasn't like he was angry. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't even asking questions. He wasn't sitting there demanding to know what happened to the woman he said he loved and he lived with. The woman who helped raise his daughter. The woman who had just been killed feet from their front door. But he was cooperative. He told the investigators that Morgan had taken her daughter to her mother's house at 8 p.m. the night before, like she always did before her early morning shifts. That was one good thing, that her daughter wasn't there when this occurred. Jason said she got back home around 9:30, they had some dinner, and they went to bed. And he claimed he was already in bed when she got home. And then sometime around 1:30 in the morning, she got up. He said he remembered her moving around and the routine seemed completely normal and nothing was unusual. But he did admit, when they asked, that they argued from time to time like any couple does. But he insisted that lately things were really, really good. And then as the interview stretched on, something shifted again. Out of nowhere, Jason finally broke down. He cried. It wasn't uncontrollable, but it was just very sudden. They thought, was this a performance? Was it real? Was he, making it look like he was so overcome with emotion? Or did it just hit him that his girlfriend was dead? I mean, it can take a little while for that shock to kind of settle and for you to figure out that this is your new reality. But there was just something about the timing that didn't sit right with the investigators. But Jason was allowed to leave that day. There was no physical evidence tying him to the crime. His clothes were clean. He had no visible injuries. And most importantly, there was no motive that they could establish. But this was just the beginning. There was a post on Morgan's Instagram on March 27th of 2020, and it said, "Sweetheart, it's okay to quit on a man who's not even trying. You deserve effort." Was that telling? Maybe, but it was months earlier. Still, there was one question that Detective Ross couldn't stop thinking about. If Morgan had been shot at such a close range, right in their driveway, just steps away from their bedroom window, how is it possible that Jason didn't hear anything? And recall, they took Jason's cell phones. When they looked through them and they saw some recent text messages between him and Morgan, not only were they arguing, but it had gotten physical. And there were texts that proved that. So they wondered, had something pushed Jason over the edge? But going back through their text history, it did appear that this was the only instance of anything like that had ever happened between them, or at least the only time it was mentioned. They still hadn't scoured through Morgan's phone. They were just now beginning to do that. So maybe there would be something more to gain there. But first they needed to look at her home. Was the weapon there? Were there signs of a struggle? Had Morgan ran from the house after a fight with Jason and then he stopped her by shooting her? Well, even though that did seem plausible, and we've seen that in many cases before where domestic incidents have led to killings like this, there were no signs inside that house that a struggle ever occurred. There were no weapons in there either. However, they did find a little bit of marijuana, and guess where they found it? Inside Jason's sock drawer. So now they got a better understanding about probably why he was hesitant to have the detective go look inside his dresser. But was that it? Was that the only reason he was acting suspicious? They needed to dig deeper. And remember how I told you that one of them had to leave FedEx? This was pretty much Morgan's dream job. She wanted to work her way up. She wanted to climb that corporate ladder. But Jason had also been in a management position at FedEx when he left, so that they could be in this relationship. So now the investigators were wondering, did this all come to a head? Had Jason moved to this other job and maybe wasn't making as much money? And maybe he regretted having to essentially leave his corporate job for something else just so that they could be together, and the relationship might have been breaking down over it. They thought the best way to find out was to interview coworkers, and one of them was a woman named Michelle Hannis. Jason used to be her supervisor before he left. Michelle had worked as a package handler when she was initially hired with FedEx, and she described Jason as encouraging, likable, definitely not violent, and Michelle didn't think he would ever be capable of hurting anyone, especially Morgan, someone that he loved. But there was an incident at work more recently, not involving Jason, of course, because he had already left, but it did involve male employees. They had apparently stolen Morgan's phone, and they began looking through all of her photos, all of her videos, and very private and intimate things that no one should have seen that was none of their business. And I was thinking, if there is somewhere where you should feel safe, it's your workplace. It's a place that's designated for you to come do your job, surrounded by a community of people that are there for the same goal. We're there to work, to be a team. And your superiors, they're supposed to protect you, to make sure there are safeguards in place so that nobody should be worried about their safety at their job. But it was that October of 2020 that Morgan started to feel unsafe for the first time at FedEx. She was still showing up. She was still grinding through those brutal early morning shifts. But behind the scenes, something had shifted. The people around her, especially some of the men in management, they weren't just rude. They were dismissive. And it was in a way that felt calculated. And then they crossed a line. It was on the morning of October 8th, just 20 days before Morgan was killed. She was helping out a team member when she just set down her phone for a few minutes in the break room. Just a few. It was totally a normal thing to do that any one of us would do at our job, not thinking that someone we work with is going to take it. When she came back, it was gone. At first, she assumed, okay, maybe I misplaced it. Maybe I left it near my station. But then someone came to her and told her where it was. It was with another employee named Jason McDermott. Another Jason, not her boyfriend, but a coworker. And he wasn't a stranger. He was someone that Morgan was pretty good friends with. He, just like Morgan, was working his way up. He was a package handler, one of the guys that she used to work alongside before she became a manager. She used to help him and encourage him. She trusted him. And initially she thought maybe he grabbed her phone to keep it safe. But when she approached him about having it, that's when something felt really off. He was upstairs in this elevated area near the conveyor belts, and she asked, "Do you have my phone?" And he said no. And that was the point that she realized, okay, wait a minute. He is acting like I'm confronting him like he did something wrong. And that's when she saw her phone. He had her phone. He wasn't trying to hide it either. And even if he would have tried to hide it from her, all she had to do was go to security because FedEx had cameras everywhere. And it was catching this moment on camera. Only when she finally spotted it did he hand it over to her. And later, Morgan would find out that Jason hadn't acted alone. 2 other male managers had joined him, superiors, people that are supposed to be role models in this corporation and make sure that things run smoothly. The 3 men, grown men, had not only taken her phone, but they went through it. Her social media accounts, her photos, her private images that were saved on her device that were meant for nobody else but her eyes and her boyfriend. As you can probably imagine, she was humiliated. She felt violated. It was one of those moments that you really can't undo. It happened. It was a moment that redefined everything. The way that you look at people, but especially the way that people look at you. People that she once trusted were now looking at her, and she knew that they had seen her private moments. They were making it into a spectacle. And the worst part is that she expected it from other people, but not from Jason. That hurt. And she confronted him about it. She sent him a text message, and he admitted that he looked at more than he should have, and that it was none of his business. She told him that mistakes could be forgiven, but that lying breaks trust. She said, "You took my belongings, you went through it, and you lied to me about it. Friends don't lie to each other. And I don't think we can be friends anymore. And just like that, their friendship was over because in Morgan's eyes, if he could not be trusted and would let something like that happen, he wasn't a friend. Morgan had values. It was the way that she was raised. It meant a lot to her to give her trust to someone, and she could easily take someone out of her life. And I know I said that she expected it from other people, like the two guys in management, and you might have been thinking, why? But it turns out that Morgan was being harassed at work. She was a beautiful woman, and there were a lot of men working at FedEx. The majority of people that worked there were men. And as soon as she stepped foot in the package handling department, she was surrounded and outnumbered by men. And over time, they started paying a lot of attention to her, and it became unwanted attention. And she felt very uncomfortable. But Morgan was a nice person, so she tried to shrug it off, and she actually started feeling more comfortable when she started dating her boyfriend who was working there. It was almost like he could now protect her. He was in a management position, in a position of power, and she felt secure. But there was still some friction because of the fact that other guys liked her. And they were jealous of the fact that she liked Jason. It kind of reminds me of high school, but you probably heard it before, that corporate kind of brings you back to that whole high school drama feeling like you're trapped in this place. It's a whole new community of people that you have to worry about with a bunch of different personalities. And then there was the promotion. Remember how I told you she was there less than a year and was promoted? Well, a lot of her male colleagues thought that was inappropriate. They believed they deserved that promotion more than she did. And one of the reasons, quite frankly, was because she was a woman. There were not as many women in upper level positions of management. And Michelle, the one I told you about that used to work under Jason, she felt like it was a boys' club. And she remembers the day that Morgan's phone was taken by those men, and they went through it. She saw Morgan crying, and she also overheard the guys making very inappropriate comments as they were looking at Morgan's pictures. When that phone violation happened, Morgan, she didn't want revenge, but she did want accountability. So she filed a complaint. She did it professionally, she did it respectfully, and she did it with her own manager. She was told that it was going to be handled. But days went by. 10 days. She didn't get a response. Nothing happened. And then Morgan was pulled aside. Not to talk about the phone incident, she was actually written up for a dress code violation. What for, you might ask? Leggings. Yeah, leggings. She had just reported being violated by her coworkers, and in return, they gave her a violation for wearing a pair of leggings. So just let that sink in, because it's unreal to me that a woman is held to a different standard. Leggings are distracting to men that are working. They can't do their jobs because a woman's wearing a pair of tight pants. And things got worse. Her chair went missing. Her clipboard would disappear. She would overhear her name being whispered. And then she would catch the tail end of a joke that would stop as soon as she walked by. Sexual innuendos were happening, little things that were meant to make her feel small. To remind her she didn't belong, that they didn't want her there, that this was a boys' club, and that job wasn't meant for her. Morgan's friends, and even her colleague, Michelle, noticed a change in her. She stopped laughing as much, she started withdrawing, and her bubbly, driven, fiercely maternal version of herself was now quiet. Of course, she was still showing up at work, but she wasn't herself. And as the days passed, Morgan stopped waiting for the system to fix itself. She was about to take matters into her own hands. On Wednesday, the 21st of October, a week before she was murdered, Morgan had enough. She and Michelle had talked about what they should do. Morgan wasn't the kind of person just back down. They decided she should finally go to HR. Now, at this point, Michelle was actually working in HR, but she was at a lower level. However, she was in direct contact with the head of the department out in Columbus, Ohio. So Michelle wrote an email to her on Morgan's behalf. She said in part, Morgan Fox asked to speak with me yesterday about some issues she's having as an operations manager. Apparently, someone took her phone. She believes private items were looked at by at least 2 to 3 people in the building. And that was the gist of the email, reporting what had happened. It felt like going higher and explaining that she had been targeted and how people had crossed boundaries, that she would get supported, that this would surely bring some action, but still nothing changed. Another week passed, and no one reached out to Michelle in regard of her email, and no one reached out to Morgan either. And then October 28th came around, the morning that Morgan had been killed. Of course, Michelle didn't know that, and she was going to speak with Morgan so they could come up with a game plan. She was texting her, she was looking for her in the building, and she was nowhere to be found. And that's when she was notified that Morgan was dead. Michelle said that she was in complete shock. She was horrified. But most of all, Michelle was confused. Because of how much tension was at the workplace, it did cross Michelle's mind. Did someone from FedEx hurt Morgan? Could someone have crossed that line? At the same time, Detective Ross was hoping for that data off Morgan's phone, but unfortunately, that extraction, it wasn't successful. It was because maybe it was laying in the rain that something got damaged inside of the phone, and Detective Ross now had to manually look through all of Morgan's text messages, all of her social media, and I'm sure you know how tedious that was going to be. What he was looking for was a connection, a motive. He was going through every single conversation, looking for arguments, looking for context. Who was she speaking with? Now he has a chance to see what Jason, her boyfriend, and Morgan's relationship really looked like behind the scenes. He was getting a full picture. And to him, it was good. It was a loving relationship. They checked in on each other. They sent loving texts to one another about their workday and what was going on, and that they loved one another. Except for that one instance where they got into an argument fairly recently. There just wasn't anything else in their conversations that stood out. Definitely not to the level of violence and murder. But as Detective Ross goes back to October 8th, which was the same day that incident occurred with her phone at work, he sees a text message exchange between Morgan and her boyfriend Jason, where Morgan explained what happened. She said, "They opened up our text messages, and someone started to type out a message as though they were writing as Morgan to Jason, and that is weird. Like they were going to send her boyfriend a message from her phone." And I couldn't help to think, what did it say? That wasn't explained in text. She was talking to other coworkers about possibly finding another job, so she took what was happening at work very seriously. At this point, Detective Ross decides to go to speak with HR at FedEx, and he's informed that the issue wasn't completely ignored. It might not have been mentioned to Morgan yet, but those 3 men were written up. And Detective Ross got their names. And one by one, he's bringing them into the station, starting with Jason McDermott. Since he apparently used to be close with Morgan before the phone incident, they were thinking he could shed some light on what the workplace was like and what led to Morgan feeling so uncomfortable. Detective Ross starts the interview by establishing how Jason and Morgan, of course, knew each other. Well, they met at work. He asked whether they hung out outside of work, and Jason said yes, but not that often. He did go over her house for her daughter's birthday, though. He had met her family, and he already knew her boyfriend Jason from work. He also said that they used to be each other's confidant. If Morgan or him was having a bad day, they would go to one another to vent about it. And he said she would even confide in him about personal stuff that was happening at home with her boyfriend. He admitted that Morgan told him they were having issues, which we know is true. Even Morgan's boyfriend told them about that. So now Detective Ross is thinking, okay, are we back at square one? Are we going to have to circle back to Morgan's boyfriend? So we asked Jason McDermott, can you guarantee me that there's any one person you know wouldn't have done this to Morgan? And McDermott was like, yeah, Jason. And I know there's 2 Jasons, it's confusing, but he meant Morgan's boyfriend. He said Jason could be many things, but he wasn't the type of person that would kill Morgan. And that's when Detective Ross asked Jason McDermott, was there anything romantic going on between the 2 of you? And he's like, no, we were just friends. But they had to press him. That's what they always do. So they said, wow, that's not what we heard. We heard that, you had some romantic feelings for Morgan. You liked her more than a friend. He said, okay, wait, there was a time that I was contemplating feelings for her, but I realized no, they weren't the right kind of feelings. It wasn't that kind of love. He loved her like a friend. He cared about Morgan. The detective needed to test him. That's what you're doing. You're not only gathering information, but you're pressing people who could potentially be a suspect. So he's like, let me give you a scenario. What if you did want more with Morgan? And what if she didn't and you killed her? And he was like, no, that didn't happen. So the detective asked him, do you know who would want to shoot her in the back of the head on her way to work? And he said, I don't know that. He was even asked directly, did you shoot her in the back of the head? And he said no. So Detective Ross moved on and said, were there people at work that were effing with Morgan? And he said yes. That Morgan had been having a ton of issues with people at work. Jason McDermott gave him names told him how some of the managers would deliberately yell at Morgan and try to make it really hard for her to work there, almost like they wanted her to quit. But the thing is, there was that phone incident that actually involved Jason himself, and he was written up for it. So Detective Ross wants to know a little bit more about that situation. And Jason was like, okay, well, it started with Morgan misplacing her phone. She asked me to go help her find it. And he admits one of the other guys had the phone and he handed it to Jason. It was unlocked and right away it was open to something private. It was her in her bra and underwear. And he couldn't help himself. He looked at it. Curiosity got the best of him. He explained as soon as he saw it, he clicked out of it. And then when Morgan was asking for the phone, he didn't want to admit he had it because he knew he just looked at something he wasn't supposed to. And she was very angry at him. They hadn't been speaking very much since then. So he had just pretty much corroborated everything Detective Ross already knew about the situation. They thanked him and they went to speak with Morgan's family, who were not dealing with her death very well. Of course they weren't. Her daughter had lost a mother. Cindy had lost a child. It was heartbreaking. Nobody could understand who would want to hurt Morgan. They just wanted justice. But that meant more pressure on the police department to figure out who did this. And that is when an anonymous tip was called in. The person said that Morgan was having an affair with one of her bosses, real high up in the company. And that was why things at work had been tense, because he was married and people were talking. Well, police made a little trip to this married boss's house, and actually it turned out he was recently divorced. And he denied everything. He said he never had an affair with Morgan, no way. And he willingly handed over his phone. They extracted it, which took about an hour, and they saw texts between Morgan and her boss. But all it was them getting their kids together. And they did, and that was it. No illicit affair, just a play date, not a date, not between them. And it was another dead end. Detective Ross goes back through the phone violation paperwork, and nothing really raises any red flags. They already checked alibis for the two other men involved, and they were concrete. So they were back on Jason McDermott. It turned out that Morgan had blocked Jason back on October 24th. And it was because he asked her, how are things going in Columbus? She said, how did you know I was in Columbus? She made it clear she was not comfortable corresponding with him anymore. And this was like stalker status, or it appeared to be. So Detective Ross goes back to FedEx and he starts asking around to other employees and coworkers about Jason McDermott's behavior when it came to Morgan. 3 employees came forward with relevant tips: Mary, Mickey, and Mark. And I don't know why there's something with everyone's name beginning with M, because we've got Morgan, Mark, Mickey, and Mary. It was making my head spin. But Mary explained that Jason was training her when she first started in August of that year in 2020. This was 2 months before Morgan's murder. Mary said that all Jason McDermott talked about nonstop was Morgan. Constantly, he was bringing her food and drinks, and she used the word obsessed. He would brag about how close they were, even showed Mary pictures of Morgan and her daughter from his phone. At one point, Mary was so fed up. She told him, you need to stop this obsession. You need to do something better with all this time you spend at work talking about Morgan. And he did all the same stuff with Mickey, talking non-stop about Morgan, about everything from her health to her hair to her daughter, even talking about how he went to Amelia's birthday party at Morgan's new house that she shared with her boyfriend. And it didn't stop when the friends were clocked out. He would text Mickey and Mary outside of work and discuss Morgan there as well. When it came to Mark, he explained to investigators that Jason would brag about his relationship with Morgan, how close they were, how he couldn't wait to hang out with her more when her and her boyfriend broke up. Because at the time, they had been going through a rough patch. And Jason was like, Morgan's going to come and live with me. And it was clear to Mark, by the way that he talked about Morgan, that he didn't just want to be roommates with her or even friends. He wanted more. He was upset when she patched things up with her man. Morgan's mom even confirmed that she saw Jason McDermott at Amelia's birthday party, but it's what she remembered that stood out. He was giving other people tours of the house. He was calling Morgan's grandmother Grandma instead of her name. And that was odd. It wasn't dangerous or over the top, but it was something that people noticed, so much so that her mom confronted Morgan about it, and she remembers Morgan being really upset and embarrassed. Mary, Mark, and Mickey were all aware of the phone incident as well, and how the men had been reprimanded. But they said that the harassment as far as Jason was concerned actually got worse. It was like things intensified at that point. He kept asking all of them to text Morgan on his behalf because she blocked him on social media and on text. And they started to notice a change in his demeanor. He was withdrawn. He was acting depressed. It was like he wasn't sleeping or showering or even taking care of himself. And he wasn't eating any food except for the morning of October 28th, the day that Morgan was killed. On that morning, both Mark and Mary noticed a change in Jason's demeanor. This time, it was positive. They all worked the same 2:30 shift, including Morgan. And that morning, Jason appeared to be happier. They said he had more spunk. He was smiling for the first time in weeks. And right away, he started talking about Morgan. Right from the moment he got to work, about how he was happy that they mended their friendship, even showing Mary the gift that he planned on buying for Morgan for Christmas. But what was odd was that Mary felt like she would know if they were talking again, like word would have gotten out. And as far as she knew, Morgan still wanted nothing to do with Jason. The coworkers explained that Jason noticed that Morgan wasn't there. Mary remembered him looking over to where Morgan should have been that morning and mentioning that she wasn't at work yet and that he didn't know where she was. But he wasn't concerned about her not being there or anything. And another detective was called in. This was all very interesting. So detectives got a subpoena for internal records about Jason McDermott from FedEx. They also pulled up all the videos from inside FedEx, especially from the day of October 8th when the phone incident occurred, because they wanted to see who was telling the truth. Well, I have a portion of those videos. Jason McDermott took her phone and he had it for almost an hour and he was just sitting there going through it. So he lied, but that's not all. Inside these internal reports, they notice that before this incident, Jason was written up for harassing another female at the workplace. This report detailed instances where this woman felt like he wouldn't stop bothering her. He was continuously talking to her, talking about her, making her feel uncomfortable, saying inappropriate things to her. So this was a pattern of behavior, and that definitely stood out. They made contact with this woman. Her name was Sienna Clements, and she was only 18 when she began working at FedEx back in 2019. Sienna was trained by Jason when she first started, and she got to know him pretty well on a coworker basis. And after a while, she felt comfortable asking him for a ride to work. So this became their routine, that Jason would give her a ride to and from work every day, and they were friendly, and everything was okay until Sienna's friend got a job at FedEx. That's when they decided they were going to carpool together instead of Sienna going with Jason. And she said, at that point, everything changed. Sienna explained how this is when the harassment truly started. It was on her social media accounts. She would log in, there would be hundreds of notifications, and they were all from Jason. He was liking all of her pictures, commenting on all of them, one after the other, sending her DMs nonstop over and over again, even before she got a chance to respond. There would be more messages in her inbox right when she opened it up and even tried to type a response. It wasn't just one of her social media accounts, it was everywhere. It was Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. Every single one was inundated with activity from this person. The reason he was doing this was because he was trying to look at her activity. He was trying to find out her location. He wanted eyes on her at all times. And finally, she bluntly told him in a text message, "We are not cool, Jason. Please leave me the fuck alone. Seriously. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but please stop." This was back in September of 2020, a month before Morgan had been killed. But after this, it gets even more terrifying. He was following Sienna. She didn't know it, and she looked at a building she was in, and there was his car sitting outside. He was in there just staring back at her, watching, waiting. Well, just like Morgan, Sienna decided to file an official complaint with FedEx because this was their employee. He was not her friend. He was not her boyfriend. That's for sure. And it was becoming very dangerous. It was never taken care of. Instead, Sienna got fired. I guess she must have been a problem employee. Wow. But I think you can see the real problem was Jason McDermott. But what evidence did they really have that he was stalking Morgan? Well, her family was looking, and Cora noticed something on Facebook. On November 2nd, Jason changed his Facebook profile to a picture of a flyer that her family had made in Morgan's memory with the hashtag Justice for Morgan Ashley. And Jason's cover photo had been changed to Morgan's front door, where people had left flowers in memory of her. Now, it's not that odd for people close to someone that they've lost to do something like this, but her family knew that Morgan and Jason were not close. And before that, on November 1st, he posted a long tribute post on his profile with the hashtags Justice for Morgan and hashtag Our Light Leading the Way. I want to read you what he wrote. It is kind of long, but I thought this was very important. So here goes. Quote, Foxy, I wish I had time to list all the ways you have impacted my life, but the list would be so long. We'd never make it to the end. You were the friend where if I was having a bad day, I knew I could always come talk to you and you'd always listen and talk to me until I felt better. And I always felt privileged when it was reversed and I was able to help you in return. It was so easy to get lost in our conversations to the point where we'd lose track of time. And the next thing we knew, an hour or two had passed. How many times do we get in trouble for talking on the clock after the shift? It got to the point where if we were talking and the boss walked by, they always had to make sure we were clocked out first, LOL. I have so many fond memories of our friendship together. I wish I could name them all, but to list a few, I remember you constantly trying to sneak up on me and scare me at work, but I always heard you coming because of those darn boots of yours. And you got me good the other day. You didn't wear them and snuck up on me as I was loading a trailer. You grabbed my sides and scared the crap out of me. I remember teasing you that despite being a super skinny person, you were always constantly snacking at work. I can't name how many times I'd catch you hiding in a corner, chowing down on some Taco Bell or one of those Yo Crunch yogurts you would constantly tell me I needed to try. Now I'm hooked and always have some in my fridge. The time you asked me to pick you up something while I was out and I was only supposed to drop it off at your door. But as soon as I showed up, you eagerly ushered me inside so you could show me the family of deer in your backyard. How even the simplest things would excite you. Like the time you were hungry and you asked me to bring you some Chick-fil-A mac and cheese since you were stuck at work. I'll never forget how your face lit up when I arrived. And with childlike excitement, you started thanking me and exclaimed how their mac and cheese was your favorite mac and cheese in the entire world. You were such a bright light in my life and so many others, and was always there for me when I needed it. You were one of the biggest goofballs I ever met, but also one of the kindest and most caring souls I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. You were a role model mother if I ever met one, and it was one of the things I respected the most about you. It didn't matter what you wanted at the time. Your daughter always came first to you, and you placed her happiness above anything else in your life. I said this many times to you, and I'll say it again. I hope, if I'm ever a parent, I can be half the parent you were. It's so strange not having you around to talk to. And this has left a giant hole in my heart, but I know you will be watching over us, your family, your friends, and your daughter. You have left the lasting impression on all of our lives, and you will never be forgotten. Rest easy, Morgan. Forever your friend, Jason McDermott. End quote. End of his post. And with this, he attached a few photos of candles outside of Morgan's front door where a vigil was held, and letters that friends had posted up on those little poster boards. Again, it's not that uncommon for a coworker or someone who you considered a friend to write a tribute like that. But something about it just made her family feel uncomfortable. And showing this to investigators, sure, it was another piece of the puzzle when it came to the way that he felt about Morgan. But what they really needed was more evidence, like what he was doing on the morning of October 28th. So they look at the security footage from FedEx. He clocked in at 2:58 a.m. So my first thought was, isn't he coming into work late? That's almost 30 minutes past his shift. But apparently, this wasn't suspicious because that was a normal occurrence according to his manager. He does his normal work routine and he leaves about 9:58 a.m. He doesn't look suspicious. His clothes are not disheveled. So they're looking for more. What about the fact that he knew that Morgan was visiting Columbus with her family on the day she ended up blocking him? She asked him, "How do you know I'm in Columbus?" This was starting to look like evidence that he could possibly be responsible, or at the very least, that he was following her, stalking her, and harassing her. When he came in for his interview, they got an extraction of his cell phone. So now Detective Ross is poring over it. Jason McDermott didn't look dangerous. He was quiet, he was polite, helpful, the kind of guy who smiled a lot and stayed under the radar. But once Morgan cut ties with him after the phone incident, his smile faded. We've heard about that. And what was left behind wasn't just rejection, it was called fixation. Detective Ross focused on the past interactions between Jason and Morgan at first because he's going back in time. And it was harmless. He brought her breakfast, picked up snacks for her, texted to see if she was doing okay. And for a while, she was polite and friendly and cordial. They were hanging out. They were friends. But after October 8th, the day that he looked through her phone without permission, Morgan's replies were short. They were cold. They were more clipped because she had drawn a line, which was her right. And Jason did not take it well. At first, he started apologizing over and over again, messaging her like nothing had happened, trying to explain himself, to excuse what he did, to undo the damage. But Morgan wasn't having it, and I respect her for that. She had trusted him once, and that door was now closed. As detectives dug deeper, there was a bunch of pictures that he screenshot from Snapchat using an app that was specifically designed to circumvent Snapchat's protection against someone collecting your posts. Videos of Morgan laughing and smiling, things that she never knew he had. It didn't notify her he was taking videos and pictures, because if she knew that, she would probably be like, why are you doing that? And confront him about it. It wasn't normal. But the most valuable information on that phone for Detective Ross was the GPS data. He wanted to look at Jason's location on the morning Morgan was killed, because that to him was more important than a bunch of photos that were collected on Jason's phone. He had an iPhone. And if you have an iPhone, you probably know this, but you can go to your location history on your phone and you can see everywhere that you have been. Your phone knows where you went. If you have your phone with you, it will know. Detective Ross braced himself. He was like, if I see his location is at Morgan Fox's house in the time frame that she was killed before work, I know he's the killer. But what's crazy is when he opens up the location history on Jason McDermott's phone, he was at his apartment the night before on October 27th, all the way until 2:48 a.m. when he left to go to work. And it tracks. It was from his apartment to FedEx. He doesn't go to Morgan's house, which is in the total other direction past where FedEx would be. So you would have to backtrack to get to work. That was a disappointing moment for Detective Ross because he thought he was onto something, but he sends a device to forensics because he just wants to make sure so they can do a more thorough extraction and maybe find something he missed. Meanwhile, one of the other detectives had made a note when they initially went out to Jason's house to make contact with him on the day of Morgan's murder. The note in the report talked about how clean his car looked. Now, that's normal. If you do an investigation and you're looking through things, one of the things that people note, they did it with Bryan Kohberger, they did it in this case, and many others we've talked about, is how pristine a vehicle would be. Because normally, there's things in your car, maybe an empty water bottle, maybe some things that you were eating in your car and wrappers left behind, or at least a little bit of dust. Jason's car had been thoroughly cleaned, even though it had been raining all day. Now, it doesn't rain a lot here in California, so I was kind of sitting here thinking, well, how would they know the difference between, a car that was washed away in the rain or a car that went through some kind of cleaning? But apparently, when it rains because you've got dirt and little rain marks on your car and things like that. But it was just very clean, so they made note of it. Like it was squeegeed. Well, his location data from after work shows that he went to a gas station called Sheetz. So they pull up the CCTV footage, and there he is, going through the car wash on a rainy day. Not typical, because why would you do that? It's just going to get messed up. But here's what's more interesting. The part of the car wash that sprays a bunch of water all over your rims and your tires underneath your car? Well, that's normal. But what's not normal is someone going forward, having their car washed, and then backing up and allowing their car to go over it again to get double washed. After he's done washing his vehicle, he goes to the front of the store, he parks his car, he gets out. Now, if you're watching this, it might look odd that he has his shirt kind of like over his mouth and face, but remember, this was COVID. So that actually wasn't a red flag for detectives. That was normal, even though it looks weird. But what was weird is he gets out, he walks around the vehicle, kind of looking at it, making sure it's clean, and then he looks over to the passenger side wheel well. Why? Well, who remembers the mud that was splashed all over that white fence? It came from the passenger side of a supposed getaway vehicle, right where their tires were spinning in that mud as they were trying to get away quickly. So now Detective Ross was like, wait a minute. He has a crash constructionist come out to measure those tire marks. And when they compare these measurements to the Ford Focus that's driven by Jason McDermott, it's a match. It has the same width, the front wheel drive. So it's possible that his car made those tire marks. But the thing is, many, many other cars had the exact same characteristics. They needed something more. The extraction from the forensic department was finally complete. Now they were going through Jason McDermott's Google searches. Can you guess what he spent a lot of his time looking at in his alone time? His searches were things like pretty blondes, long-haired blonde girl doing a naked handstand. Now that's a new one. And I'm not making light of this. It's weird. Girl on girl videos of blondes, and the list goes on and on. But there was a trend in what he likes looking at, characteristics that match Morgan. But I'm thinking about something else they found. He was a catfish. He was on Skype pretending to be a female, a lesbian, with the name Just Monica 69. And he was trying to talk to other women and even other men, pretending that he was in a relationship with Morgan. It's kind of convoluted, right? He's using her picture, sharing her personal pictures with this random stranger online that thinks he's a woman. I don't think I've seen anything quite like this before. I've done catfishing cases, but this is an obsession to a whole different level. So Detective Ross had manually gone through Jason's phone and saw the pictures that were on there. But the thing is, with an extraction, you can see things that were deleted. He had thousands of pictures and videos on his phone of Morgan. Some that he took of her when she wasn't looking, when she didn't know that she was being recorded. He was bringing his phone out at work and other places while they were hanging out and actually have clips from some of these videos that he took without her knowledge. You can see her standing there. He's filming her legs, standing in the shipping area of FedEx. It's so disgusting. It's such a violation. And his phone being positioned right at her crotch level. Disgusting. There was another one where apparently they were still friends. He came over her place. She's washing the dishes and he's filming her from behind. You're probably thinking, this is obvious. He killed her. But it wasn't obvious. They still hadn't found a direct connection. So they decide, why not pull up some traffic cameras? Because even though his phone was apparently at his apartment, according to his GPS, it didn't mean that he didn't race over to Morgan's. She left around 2 to 2:15 every single morning, and he could have raced back to his apartment and then got a FedEx. They pull footage from all different roads leading to Morgan's. And one of them from Schneider and Main Street, a crossroad right before you get into Morgan's neighborhood. Well, they're scanning through it. Guess what they see at 1:37 a.m.? The same blue Ford Focus that Jason drives going through that intersection in the direction of Morgan's house. Wow. And then at 2:17 a.m., he goes right back through the same intersection the way he came, and he's caught on camera 2 times. And I couldn't help but sit here and think, you thought you were smart. You're as dumb as they come. Just like Olivia Gonzalez said about Brian Kohberger in her victim impact statement. I love that line. You're as dumb as they come. You left your phone at home thinking you won't be traced, but you forgot that the world is full of cameras. Now all they needed was the murder weapon. They already searched his apartment, didn't find one. They searched his vehicle, it wasn't there. They searched the workplace, they didn't find a gun. But there was one place they hadn't searched yet, his parents' house, which was in the area. So they go to speak with them. His parents say he hasn't been here in months. Oh, except for mid-October. He came to get some of his mail and he brought his mom a birthday present, even though her birthday was in July. Really odd. And then he came back again on October 28th, the day that Morgan was killed. They wondered why he needed to go over his parents' house twice in the same month. His mother even said that when he was there, he got the text message from a friend that they found Morgan's body, that she was dead. And he dropped to the floor and he was crying hysterically. And they let the detectives inside, and there it was, a gun locker. The detectives ask about this gun locker's access, and Jason's father shows them a key. It was totally accessible. A key right inside the house. Luckily, Jason's parents were cooperating with police. They let them take the firearms so they could be compared to bullets and fragments that were found at the scene. Those were sent to the crime lab. Meanwhile, Jason's parents made him aware of what was going on, specifically in regard to his car being caught on a camera near Morgan's residence on the morning she was killed. And even though his parents were cooperative, they were also on their son's side, of course. He was their son. So they made him aware that the police had been there. And not only that, they told him something in regard to his car. The police had alluded to the fact that it had possibly been caught on camera near Morgan's residence, strengthening their case as the parents were denying he had anything to do with it. Remember Mickey from work? He goes into this whole spiel about his car's black box, that he's been watching YouTube videos about how it can be hacked and how he had a spare key to his car at the house. And he's thinking someone broke into his car and they drove his car over and killed Morgan. And they're making it look like he did it. Later, he's asking a bunch of questions about traffic cameras. He's like, when do they record? Do they record all the time? Or do they only record when you're speeding? This was when they were actually on their way to the candlelight vigil. It was being put on at Morgan's house, but not put together by her family. Her parents didn't even know. Her family didn't even know. Her coworkers from FedEx, including Jason McDermott, were putting it together. That's when Morgan's mom pulled up to the house with little Amelia, who's only 8 years old at the time. And as they're getting out of the car, who comes up? Jason. It was what he was saying that made her feel very uncomfortable, but also what he was doing. He comes up to the door. He's talking to her grandchild. And she's actually trying to close the door. He gets into the vehicle. He's sitting sideways on the floorboard, and he's saying, "You look just like your mother. You're so sweet. Here's a stuffed animal." Morgan's mom told him to leave, to get out of their way, and he ignored her. It's like she wasn't even there. Instead, he took his hand, and you know how some people will kind of move your hair behind your ear all lovingly and gentle? Ugh. He was touching this 8-year-old, saying how beautiful she was. Yuck. And then he says, "Never forget me. When you looked at the stuffed animal, always remember him." I would have thrown it straight in the trash. What was creepy was that the next day when Cindy was over there again collecting more of her daughter's things, she looks out the window right where her daughter's car had been the morning she was killed. And Jason is out there with one of his friends. They're looking at the ground. They're kicking things around with their feet. It was weird. She went down there to confront him. "Why are you here? Why are you at her daughter's home? You're not welcome there." And he says, "Oh, I just never got a chance to pin something on her memory board." It's like he just couldn't stay away. Now he's at her home, near her family. The crime lab finally came back with a report on the guns. They had seized any guns in his family's possession that were .22 in caliber, which included a Ruger, a Chiappa firearm, a Beretta, and a Heritage Rough Rider. The Rough Rider was a revolver, and the other 3 guns were semi-automatic. No shell casings were recovered from the scene, and that suggested that a revolver was probably used. However, the bullet fragments that were recovered from Morgan's brain and her hair were too deformed to be useful in comparison. The bullets recovered from the interior passenger's door of the car was able to be compared. So keep that in mind because that is a significant part of this. They also noticed that they had a right twist and 6 grooves and lands, which were marks on the bullet as they passed through the barrel of the gun. That's important because they're comparing, right? But they couldn't exclude the Heritage Rough Rider. This meant it could have been the murder weapon, but they couldn't say with 100% certainty that it was the murder weapon. And all of the .22 caliber bullets that were found at Jason's parents' house, none of them were Lubaloy coated. And that was something that a defense attorney could really focus on. They could be like, well, why? If he got them from his parents' house, why wouldn't he be using bullets that were also at his parents' house? And you know what? I give these detectives so much credit because guess what? They weren't going to stop there. No way. They decided to call in a specialized canine who can detect explosive residue. And when you fire a gun, that's a mini explosion, right? So you have all kinds of particles and residue, gunshot residue that comes out, and a dog will alert to that. So they bring the dog out, and even though nothing can be seen with the naked eye, the dog alerts specifically on the driver's side of Jason's car and on the space between the door and the seat. The dog is then brought to other areas like the front of Morgan's house, in the house, to her boyfriend's car. It doesn't alert. But was it enough? Enough not only for an arrest, but to put Jason behind bars for her murder forever? Well, they hadn't examined all of Morgan's devices yet. And when they got into her laptop, they found something. Just one day before Morgan was gunned down outside of her own home, her colleague Michelle had reached out to her, suggesting that she contact HR herself. She was like, listen, I will help you write it. You can CC me on it. And Morgan wrote a very detailed email. Quote, I feel like I'm being targeted at work. I'm sure speaking to you is just going to make things for me at work even worse. But at this point, I have no other choice. End quote. Not only that, she provided HR with Jason's name. He was on to her too. Jason texted Mark, worried that Morgan was going to get him fired. What's sad is that HR responded to Morgan, saying that they could speak by phone on October 28th. But she never got the chance to tell her story to the head of HR. There's your motive. Well, there was more than one. Rejection, the fear of getting fired, and of course, probably the biggest one, Jason McDermott not being able to get what he wanted, Morgan. And if he couldn't have her, no one could. 29-year-old Jason Allen McDermott was arrested for the murder of Morgan Fox on November 4th of 2020. It took just 1 week, 7 days after Morgan was found slumped over in her car. The Stark County Sheriff's Office made their move. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't SWAT teams taking him down, but it happened. Detective Ross and his team had spent the entire week building a wall around Jason McDermott, one detail at a time. They had Morgan's email, sent just a day before her murder, naming him by name. They had surveillance footage of his car. We saw it going through the intersection. They had his car wash run, meticulously scrubbing the tires and the undercarriage after the murder. They had the canine alerting for explosive residue in his vehicle, indicating that a gun had most likely been there recently and been fired. And of course, the forensic extraction of his phone. Thousands of images and videos of Morgan, fake social media accounts, sexual fantasy threads, secret recordings inside her home. They had interviews with coworkers. Jason was spiraling. He was obsessed. He was consumed with Morgan, especially after she cut him off. They didn't need a smoking gun because they had a pattern. They had a timeline and a motive, and a mountain of digital footprints that all pointed in the same direction. But after this arrest, Morgan's family wasn't just celebrating. Arresting the person responsible for someone's death does not bring them back. It doesn't undo everything that happened. It doesn't erase the image we saw of her mother standing at that crime scene, overhearing the reporter tell her her daughter had been shot in the head, and then grasping onto that deputy. But it did do something. It gave them a name and a face, someone to point to and say, that's the man who took Morgan's life. On December 17th of 2020, the Stark County Grand Jury returned an indictment, charging Jason with 1 count of aggravated murder with a firearm specification and 1 count of menacing by stalking, which was a felony of the 4th degree. Jason pleaded not guilty, and he elected to go to trial, which began on April 2nd of 2021. And the prosecutors laid it all out. The timeline, when Morgan spoke to her mom that morning, everything in full detail that we already know. The 137 camera catching his Ford Focus traveling towards her home. The state even argued that Jason had purposely left his phone behind. A nice job, but she didn't think of everything right. He thought he would have an airtight alibi, but he didn't count on the cameras or the mud. They showed the jury everything. The surveillance footage from the gas station, the meticulous cleaning where he reversed so that the undercarriage could be sprayed a second time, the canine alerting to the presence, everything. The jury was shown text after text, every photo, thousands and thousands of files. The secret things that Jason was keeping hidden, especially his fake identity on Skype, weaving fantasy stories with Morgan's identity while talking about her in explicit, obsessive detail. He had created a second life for himself, one where she belonged to him, whether she wanted it or not. But what I really wanted to tell you about is something you hadn't heard yet until this point. His defense. Because when they presented their case, it wasn't filled with bold declarations or even a new alibi, but they did bring forth a new coworker, one that wasn't against Jason. and his name was Daniel Spence. He testified on Jason's behalf. Daniel said Jason was not angry with Morgan over what happened with her phone. He was upset with himself for betraying her trust. Daniel also said he saw Jason on the morning of October 28th, and he didn't observe anything out of the ordinary. He alleged that Morgan's work schedule wasn't posted anywhere. Jason would not have known if Morgan was even coming into work on the morning of October 28th. But I was thinking, he knew so much about her. He was following her. He was tracking her. He knew about her personal life. He would have known when she came to work. Everyone worked the same shift, 2:30 a.m. That was her habit. He knew her habits. So I did not think that was a good argument. Jason's parents also testified. Was I surprised? I guess not. They both said that even though Jason was familiar with guns and he had gone shooting with his father in the past many times, he had to stop shooting guns because he had surgery on both of his wrists. And according to his parents, that surgery meant he could not have the grip strength to discharge a firearm. That's a first. I had never heard that before. What about the key to the gun safe? Well, Jason's dad said he only had one key and he was the only person that knew where it was. However, one of the deputies said that when the guns were confiscated, he saw the key and it was only 6 feet away from the gun safe. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have taken Jason that much time to find it, even if he didn't know where it was. But when asked whether or not Jason kept his car clean, both of his parents testified he never washed his car. So for him to get right off of work on a rainy day and go straight to a car wash, that was suspicious. But in the end, there were no good explanations for why his car was seen driving towards Morgan's house on the day she was murdered. The prosecution ended their case by reminding the jury of something simple. Morgan Fox had tried to protect herself, and Jason McDermott took that from her. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was of course silent, and Jason was found guilty of aggravated murder and menacing by stalking. The man who had once called Morgan his friend, who watched her, recorded her, obsessed over her, was now sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Did he cry? No. He didn't apologize. He didn't look at Morgan's family. But there was one person he couldn't avoid. Amelia. Morgan's daughter. She was too young to fully understand all of the legal terminology, of course. But she was old enough to know exactly what had been taken from her. I couldn't believe that she was brave enough to give a victim impact statement, and oh my gosh, if you don't tear up listening to this, her voice might have been shaking, but her words were powerful. So let me play it for you.
I love my mom a lot. She was my whole world and life. I will never see her again because of the monster in this room. I thought monsters weren't real, but you proved me wrong. You hurt so many people. You hurt me and the people I love. I wish she could see me graduate from high school. I wish she could see me get married. You made it so she can't do any of these. You ruined your own life because of how much of a bad person you are. I just wanted to know why you did it. It will haunt me for the rest of my life, and that life will be without my mommy.
The one sentence that stuck out was that she thought monsters weren't real, but that he proved her wrong. Wow. That was the first and only time that this monster showed any signs of emotion. He was just empty, detached. But hearing Amelia speak, that moved him. I sometimes wonder what killers are thinking. I don't like to give them much thought. Honestly, I like to maintain the victim as the focal point of all of these cases. But sometimes I just think to myself, like, what is he thinking? Like, what's going through his mind? Does he care? Does he say to himself, like, I regret doing that? Like, why did I do that? Or are these monsters just so different from us that we can never rationalize it? After the sentencing, Morgan's family actually launched the Morgan Ashley Fox Foundation, which is an organization dedicated to helping other families impacted by violence and supporting women who are experiencing workplace harassment. Her sister Cora said they never would want Morgan to be remembered for how she died, but for how she lived. She said that she hoped that Morgan's case finally forces companies to take these things seriously. She said if there's another woman who raises a real concern while they're just doing their job, don't treat it like it's nothing. Fix it. before something like this happens again. And now I wanted to say something personal to all of you. These cases, they scare me because we put ourselves in someone like Morgan's shoes. That's what we do when we're listening to these cases. That's what I do, or someone like Sienna's shoes. And I have to think to myself, how do we get stalkers like this to stop? How would you distance yourself? How would you get them out of your life once they're obsessed? I've done cases like this before that have this kind of element to them, and they're so horrifying because these people, when are they going to stop? Many don't stop until they reach their goal, and a lot of times their goal is to take their object of their obsession out of this world so that they don't lose. But there are resources, and I have to leave them for you below because you might be dealing with something like this, or you might know someone that is, and they might need that. I also wanted to end with the fact that Morgan's family has also dedicated the 22nd of every month, Morgan Day. And on that day, they encourage people to do something kind in her name. You can buy a stranger some food. You can donate to a shelter. You can write a thank you note, just anything to show up for someone the way Morgan always did. And by the time I'm posting this, I think we missed the 22nd by a few days, but it doesn't mean that you can't still do something today, something nice for someone else. Morgan wasn't just a name in a file. She was a mom. She was a daughter, a sister, a good friend, a woman who built something beautiful from the ground up. And she refused to let anyone steal her peace without putting up a fight. And even in her final days, she never lost her voice. And it lives on every time her story is told. So don't forget her. And thank you so much for being here today to listen to Morgan's story. I will see you in my next one. Bye.